Barely Research Facts is a fact-based podcast brought to you by ArtNowThus, an experiential arts agency based out of Mumbai. Each week, we pick a word at random, dive into it, and see what it brings to us. We are your hosts. My name is Ragini, and this is Shar. Let's go!
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Barely Research Facts.
Hi, guys.
I'm very excited about today's episode.
Unlike every other episode.
Because it's our 10th episode.
Oh yeah, it is our 10th episode. Yay!
Yeah, every other episode, very lackluster, very lukewarm response from us about every other episode. This episode, however,
it's big.
Oh boy.
Excitement is just through the roof. Huh? All right. So, because this is our 10th episode, it's actually been a special treat for us, but this is our first episode ever with a listener-suggested word.
Yay, we've got a listener.
I know. Yay! Yes, we do. So, Akshai from Pune, who spent a very productive day in lockdown listening to multiple BRF episodes, Akshai then sent us a message saying that he would like us to do this word next, and he wants to know everything about it. So, in typical Barely Research Facts, yeah, really the right place to come to. So, Shah, you want to introduce the word with an homage to our last episode?
So, here's a riddle. What am I? I'm an animal that lives in the ocean. I move very fast using a strange kind of motion. You will never see me in any one group. Poem written by Anatomic Soup.
I love that the byline is in a part of the riddle. It's very similar to us making a riddle part of this episode so that you link back to the previous episode. Yeah, it's not very subtle.
So if you haven't already guessed by now, we're talking about an octopus.
Yay! Yeah. And this was a surprisingly fun one to research, honestly.
Yeah. Sorry, Akshai. I went into it thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? But actually, it's been such a treat to research.
It's been really fun. My first fact actually with this is, so what do you think is the plural of octopus?
I want to say you want me to say something, but it's the opposite of that. Yeah. Octopi.
It is what you always say. Yeah, exactly. And it is not.
Yay, I'm wrong.
Yeah. The plural of octopus is octopuses. Now, it's commonly people misuse octopi. So you're not the only one. So the word octopus is what's called a loan word, which is basically a word that's borrowed from another language.
Okay,
all right.
Yeah.
So if the loan word is Latin, like cactus, then the plural is cacti. However, if the word originates from Greek roots, as does the word octopus, then the plural is not I. Technically, it should be odes. So technically, your plural of octopus is octopodes. Mm-hmm. But in simple, regular day-to-day English, you just octopuses.
Okay.
There's a really fun article on this on the internet. And I think this guy was just sent numerous DMs correcting him on his use of octopuses. So he put out this slightly passive-aggressive article telling people why they were wrong and why he was not. But in that article, he quotes this book called Words and Rules, which is written by this gentleman called Steven Pinker.
Okay.
Steven Pinker says that the attempt to foist proper Greek and Latin plurals has bred pseudo-erudite horrors such as axia, which is for more than one axiom, peni, which is a plural for penis, wrong, rhinoceri, wrong, and octopi, which is also wrong. So the us in octopus is not the Latin noun ending that switches to I in the plural, but the Greek that switches to pus. Just cute, I think. Pus. It's cute.
Pus.
Yeah. So if you've listened to this podcast, you now know it is not octopi, it is octopuses.
I feel like this will breed an almost like resistant to change attitude of I will say octopi now. So...
Are you speaking from personal experience right now?
Yeah, I am. Okay. Yeah, I also like his use of pseudo-erudite. I'm going to use that every now and then. Great insult.
But you will not use octopuses.
Yeah, great 5 on 5 for insult, 2 on 5 for plurals.
For correcting me. I am not wrong.
Yeah. So where do these octopuses come from? Where do you think?
The aliens came out of nowhere. They landed on Earth from nowhere.
You sneaky. I'll tell you.
Okay.
So there's this paper published. It's a peer-reviewed paper published in the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology. Peer-reviewed, mind you.
Oh, I read that.
Yeah, I know. It's just like my coffee table book.
Yeah, I know.
So a team of 33 authors published a paper that had a simple, if unusual, thesis, which was that the Cambrian explosion, pause here, side note, the Cambrian explosion is a phenomenon where there was a sudden burst of biodiversity during which most modern animal groups first appeared in the fossil record some 540 million years ago. So there was like suddenly it just like boom, and we're here.
Wow.
So that's called the Cambrian explosion. And these authors say that the Cambrian explosion was the direct result of an extraterrestrial virus that crashed to Earth in a meteoric impact. I'm just going to let that hang there.
Okay. No one can accuse us of not being relevant.
Yeah. But yeah, so the paper basically, it revives a controversial theory. It's not the first time that it's been said. It's known as panspermia, where it's posited that life on Earth began by it being introduced extraterrestrially. So the panspermia hypothesis suggests that biological life as we know it did not evolve independently on Earth, but was rather seeded from life-bearing comets that pummeled our planet at various times throughout history. So these comets introduced novel life forms that evolved on other planets, including viruses, durable microorganisms like unearthly tardigrades, which you must look up. They are the cutest little soft little insect bears in the world. And other species. So now how does it
dropped on the excitement there?
I know. But you must look at tardigrades. They are so cute. You just want to just cuddle it. So how do octopuses connect to this? So these researchers have pointed at the octopus specifically because they have complex nervous systems, camera-like eyes, and a capacity for camouflage that evolved suddenly and without precedent in their family tree. So the genes for these adaptations, the authors wrote, do not seem to have come from octopus ancestors. But it is plausible then to suggest that these traits seem to be borrowed from a far distant future in terms of terrestrial evolution, or more realistically, from the cosmos at large. Basically, what they're saying is...
So aliens did come and drop him.
It aliens. In one theory laid out in the paper, the authors posit that fertilized octopus eggs crashed into the sea aboard an icy comet at the onset of the Cambrian explosion. And another explanation they propose could be that an extraterrestrial virus infected a population of early squid, causing them to evolve rapidly into octopuses as we know them today.
Okay.
Yeah. Now let me take all of that and trash it with this quote from Ken Steadman, a virologist and professor of biology at Portland State University at the time of the writing of the article. He says that there's no question that early biology is fascinating, but I think this, if anything, is counterproductive. Many of the claims in this paper are beyond speculative and not even really looking at the literature. So Steadman came in and was like, no, not having it.
No,
so,
you're wrong.
Yeah.
Just straight up.
Yeah. So apparently the octopus genome was mapped in 2015. And it did contain a lot of surprises, a lot of things that we didn't know. But one of the relevant findings to this particular paper was that the octopus's nervous system genes split from the squids only around 135 million years ago. So this is after the Cambrian explosion. So no, it could not have been comets and could not have been aliens. So that's one of the reasons it was discounted by this particular, I'm no expert, so I'm going to go with Ken's word. There's also a lady called Karen Molling, a virologist at the Max Planck Institute for Molecular Genetics in Germany. And she wasn't as diplomatic as Ken. She started diplomatically and said that while it's useful, very useful for thinking about the influence of the universe on our planet in new ways, the findings in the study cannot be taken seriously. There's no evidence for it at all.
Okay, wow.
So
really calling a spade, huh?
Yeah, we've just taken you on a wild ride, posited something and then trashed it. No, it's not true. But this begs the question, where did they come from?
Yes, yeah, we haven't answered that yet.
Yeah. So the octopus belongs to a class of marine species called cephalopods within the mollusca phylum. Now, all this is like just, it's science speak. But
Greek and Latin.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, it is Greek and Latin. Oh my God, Ragini.
Yeah.
They're close cousins of the cuttlefish and the squid. And they all come from this particular genus called the cephalopods. And a cephalopod is any species that has tentacles attached to a distinct head. Cephalo meaning from Greek, head, and pod meaning foot. So head, foot. So the oldest octopus fossil is from an animal that lived 296 million years ago, millions of years before the dinosaurs lived. So did not know that. That blew my mind a bit. And so these cephalopods were once thought to have evolved from an ancestor that had a curved tapering shell, and they're closely related to the snails, gastropods, which are also snails. So I'll talk a little bit about ammonites later in the episode, which is very interesting as an ancestor of the cephalopods and basically the octopuses. Sorry, Stephen. But coming back to cephalopods, they've been innovators for a long time. Several 100 million years ago, they reinvented the shell. So other mollusks had developed shells, think snails and clams, etc. But the cephalopod sealed off its shells either through chambers or a thin layer of tissue that worked to replace water with gas. So just imagine a snail's shell, but it's sectioned off. And each of these little sections has gas in it. And the advantage of that is that a buoyant shell totally transformed the way that they moved. So they became...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so instead of crawling on the ocean floor...
They basically became like little lifebuoys.
Basically expel air to make them propel forward. So these cephalopods, they dominated the oceans, especially during the Mesozoic and the Paleozoic era, over 542 million years ago. This is
long time ago.
It's just a very long time ago. These octopi uncles were just like killing it. So now, voracious and omnivorous predators, wildly adaptable survivors. So these cephalopods, they were, their reign lasted longer than the dinosaurs. They survived an even greater extinction event, which was called the Permian extinction.
Wow.
Did not know about this, but it's when volcanoes in Siberia erupted for a solid 100,000 years, blotting out nearly 96% of all marine life.
Shit, wow. Did not know that.
I know. When I started researching this, I was like, I'll just, where did octopuses come from? Like, I feel like Neil deGrasse Tyson right now, explaining the history of
the universe.
Yeah.
How did we come into being?
Yeah. The least knowledgeable person about the subject explaining it to you. But these are just things that interest us, And so the main reason why there's no trace of cephalopods, is because many of them left behind very little in the fossil record. So the reason for this is that they had a soft body, and it's far less likely to fossilize than a hard shell or an exoskeleton or, just something harder basically than a pudgy, soft body.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was interesting, man. Did not know all of that.
Now, coming to humans and octopuses, let's talk a little bit about our relationship with them.
Okay.
So in terms of separation down the evolutionary timeline, the octopus is about as far away from humans as an animal can get. The last common ancestor between us and octopuses is a flatworm that trawled the sea floor 750 million years ago. So since then, our evolutionary journeys split and we said bye-bye to each other. We don't have anything in common. So
wow.
Contrast that with the chimpanzee human last common ancestor. It was between 4 and 13 million years ago. So that's a huge jump.
Yeah, I mean, you can totally tell that I'm fully getting the context of... But yes, lots of time and very little time. Context of very, very long time.
Chimpanzee uncle, octopus, not even same species, family, nothing. Too far back have we split from them evolutionarily.
So I also realized, but octopuses are just incredibly fascinating, and not just to, there's been so much research on just how they live, what they do. I went down this whole rabbit hole with the life cycle of an octopus, and it is incredible. Basically, they don't live very long. They have really short lives, sometimes just a few years. On, a good lifespan would be a few years. Sometimes they can be as short as 6 months. What researchers have begun to realize, or at least what is currently being sort of thought as the most plausible explanation for why their lifespan is so short, is because the primary purpose is to reproduce. All right.
Yep.
So so maybe not that far from human beings, actually. Octopus sex is just incredibly fascinating. Okay, now generally we know that octopuses are the fairly solitary creatures.
Yeah.
They're known to not really be super social. So how they find each other is still a bit unclear, but I think the general idea is that males will, they will swim across the ocean and try and find female octopuses. Female octopuses usually are just, will draw males towards them using chemical cues.
Okay.
Once a male octopus finds a female octopus is when things get really interesting, because each male wants to mate and pass on his genes to a new generation, right? Now, the problem becomes that most female octopuses are much larger and hungrier than male octopuses. All right, so there is a constant risk for the male that instead of being able to have sex with the female and mating, he is going to end up becoming dinner. So there are multiple instances of researchers having observed female octopuses who suddenly will just turn on the male octopus and strangle them and then, just take him into their dens, and most likely he just becomes dinner. So while sexual cannibalism you do see it happening in nature, but strangulation is extremely rare. All right. But as a result of the fact that, for a male octopus, having to mate is such a life-threatening exercise, it's quite interesting to see how they have combated it. So there are multiple positions that male octopuses can try, usually with slightly more socially adept octopuses. The females aren't as likely to turn on the male.
Yeah.
So in that case, the octopus just, now octopuses have 8 tentacles, we all know that, of which 7 are normal. They're normal arms and legs for them to move about with. There's one arm, which is the mating arm, which is called the hectocotylus.
Okay.
And what this does is it's where the octopus stores its sperm. It also has, the tip of the arm also is equipped with an erectile tissue, which is not unlike that is found in the human penis, which basically provides
it's an octopenis.
Did not think of that. But basically, the octopenis is what, goes into the female and then fertilizes her and then comes out. Now, in some cases, the octopus will just mount on the female and use their octopenis to just go in and come out. And hopefully, these are slightly smaller octopuses where the female is unlikely to turn on them and they haven't had so many instances of sexual cannibalism.
Yeah.
But with the more aggressive females, you see that the octopuses also have larger arms. So therefore, it extends the reach of the arm. So that what they normally do is they just pop in, put their arm in, and then get out as soon as possible.
So the worst that could happen is they could probably lose an arm. They're very long octopenis.
Octopuses have evolved so that in some cases they just surrender the arm and go. And that's quite an extreme way of having sex and saving yourself. They just rip up the arm so the arm is inside. In fact, that's how the hectocotylus gets its name, because in the early 19th century, zoologist Georges Cuvier discovered these strange foreign objects inside female octopuses, inside a certain species of a female octopus. And he thought it might be some kind of parasitic worm that led to their death. And he ended up calling it Hectocotylitis octopodus. And even when it was discovered what it actually was, which was basically the octopus penis inside female octopus, the name stuck.
Oh.
And so these are, So, so these are the more dire octopus sex and mating rituals. However, there are some octopus species that are a little bit more social, all right, and their behavior is a bit more nuanced. So in these cases, sometimes the male octopus just approaches the female octopus when she is foraging for food, and so hopefully she's too busy to eat to actually also kill him at the same time. So he just gets in, does his job, and bounces out. In some cases, the larger male octopuses become like guards for the female. So they'll stand outside the female's den and won't let anyone in.
Aww.
And so you have these smaller males who are called the sneaker octopuses, because they basically will just sneak past when the guard is not there, or they'll pretend to be female by hiding their octopenis and getting inside. And so these are in octopus world is slightly more social behavior.
Sneaking sperm into females.
Yeah.
Slightly more social.
Slightly more. There are certain octopus species who actually have very intimate mating rituals, which is basically they'll mate beak to beak and mouth part to mouth part. And the octopus beak is probably one of their most deadly weapons. And so the fact that to mate they go that close is really odd for an animal that is so antisocial. What researchers are realizing is that the more they study octopuses, the more they realize that there's just so many patterns of behavior that evolve.
Yeah.
It's really odd that for an animal that is so antisocial, that is so prone to sexual cannibalism, their mating ritual has to be so intimate. Mm-hmm. That they actually have to just get it in and order for anything to happen. And the theories around this is that most likely the primary purpose of an octopus's life is to mate. and to pass the genes on. And so in that sense, there isn't that much evolutionary pressure on males to sort of avoid death via mating. So they just kind of have to, that's just part of how things are with them. And it's also really, really difficult to study octopuses because A, they live underwater, so there are those obvious problems. They're also amazing at camouflaging themselves. So they're difficult to even see clearly. And usually when they're mating, there are about 16 arms involved and it gets kind of confusing to keep track of. So our research around this is really limited. Now, so once, I've already said, the primary purpose of an octopus's life seems to be to reproduce. So what happens after that, right? After they've mated?
If they're not dinner.
Usually, if they're not, yeah. So either they die right then and there, or they lose an arm, one of the two. In most cases, now right after this, it's not like because a male has escaped, he will go out and... So after one attempt, they usually become senescent, which is they just rapidly grow old and sort of die, natural deaths.
Oh.
Yeah. The female, however, does not have an easier time. In fact, she actually has a slightly more rough death. It's quite graphic. But so octopuses are what you call semiparous animals, which means they reproduce once and then they die. All right. Now, once a female octopus lays a clutch of eggs, she suddenly stops eating and sort of goes into this strange... It's called a brooding period.
Okay.
All right. Where she basically she loses interest in eating. The brooding period is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is about 4 to 5 days where she's just keeping a close eye on the eggs. And if at some point like this, a stray crab or something wanders by, she will eat, but she won't actively go out and hunt for food. The next stage lasts about 8 to 10 days where they basically go into active brooding and she will starve herself.
Why?
She just won't eat. Nobody really knows. It could be that because octopuses are so solitary and they are prone to cannibalism, nature's just kind of evolved the female octopus to kill herself so that the child can survive. The other option is also that because octopuses seem to grow indefinitely, it's just nature's way of making sure that, it's not... Otherwise, you just have these swarms of octopuses that are just dominated by these massive, large guys who are just old and cranky and don't want anybody else to grow. So, yeah, so that could be one thing. The third stage of brooding is probably the most disturbing, where basically she will become absolutely listless. She will spend no time she'll start moving away from her eggs, and then she will start slamming herself against objects, grooming herself excessively, running their arms over their mantles until they become a tangled mess. Their skin peels off and they lose muscle tone, even what is beyond what you would expect to see in a regular starving octopus. And so basically they just kill themselves, often very violently and viciously.
I started off thinking, this is funny, but now I'm sad.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing to watch. So I think it's just because they lead these really solitary lives, that also we think. They're extremely intelligent creatures. They obviously have these really violent, mating tendencies. And then their death is also just somehow this strange, it's just self-imposed almost. In order to understand why this happens, there was a study conducted in Brandeis University in 1977 by the psychologist Jerome Bodinsky, where he removed the optic gland from a female octopus. The optic gland basically sits between the eyes, and without this gland in them, the female octopuses, after hatching the eggs, abandon the eggs, resume feeding, and some even mated again.
Oh.
So again, there's no deep understanding of this, but it was concluded that it might be secreting some kind of self-destruct hormone, but how it works exactly is still unclear.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. They produce high levels of neuropeptides before mating, which is a small protein-like molecule that has been linked to feeding behavior in many animals. Right after mating, however, the neuropeptide production plummets. So it seems like octopuses are just biologically designed to shut down and self-destruct right after they finish mating. And it, of course, looks really strange to us from a human perspective because the way our behaviors are so different from this. But this apparently just seems to be normal in the scientific world.
Wow.
So that's the really grim and dark story of how octopuses reproduce and then die.
Yeah, the terribly terrible deaths, and just enjoy the knowledge. God. Okay, so from a very on the nose topic, which is just octopuses, I wanted to talk about ammonites. Okay.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that, yeah.
So what are ammonites? They're closely related to octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish. And this is the only connection between them and octopuses. But I found them extremely interesting and I wanted to talk about them. And they technically are very close cousins, or you could say great, 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 8 times 1 million and uncles or grandfathers or whatever to the octopuses.
So basically, you have no idea.
I want to talk about them. So the earliest ammonites, they appeared about 400 million years ago. They flourished across the globe, and literally their fossils have been found everywhere, all over the planet. So they flourished during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods and then became extinct about 66 million years ago. So for 300 odd million years, they were the boss, and then they just died out. So they lived in the sea.
Wow.
Their name is derived from the Egyptian god Ammon. Ammon's sacred animal was a ram, and an ammonite looks like a ram's horn. You know, the curled one with like lines across it. So it looks like that. And Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman naturalist, he called ammonites the horns of Ammon. And the name is derived from that. So the spiral shell, it grew with a tentacled animal inside the last chamber, or the body chamber of the shell. So the last chamber is obviously the one with the opening, and then you'd have the tentacles of the animal like sort of coming out of it. The empty chambers, or the septa, they were filled with usually gas or fluid. Remember I was talking about the gastropods earlier? Yeah, so they're filled with gas or fluid, enabling the ammonite to control its buoyancy and movement in the water. And it also strengthened the shell to prevent it being crushed by the water pressure. So there's many different types of ammonites, some rounded, some flattened. The sections can be different. Some are ridged, some are smooth. And you can see this because, as I said, fossils are found aplenty. They're cut in half and polished, so you can see the internal structure in a lot of them, and shows you the sections on the outside of the shell representing the chambers inside. So coming to very close to where I live, which is a place called Whitby, it's about an hour and a half from us. There's many ammonites that can still be found over there. In fact, they're so common that the town of Whitby's shield has ammonites in them.
Wow. I did not know towns have shields.
Yeah, where I live has a town shield as well. I don't know. Yes, we won't comment on the usefulness of the town shield except as a sort of identity. But yeah, so in Whitby, there were supposed to be snakes which were turned to stone in legend by Saint Hilda. And often snake heads were carved on the ammonites before selling them to tourists. And this is, tourists in that era as well, not just us right now, but
Oh, wow. So popularity has endured.
Yeah. So the ammonites on the shield of Whitby, there's 3 of them, and there are snake heads carved into them. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about other places that ammonites were found and the lenses through which human beings looked at them. So in America, the Blackfoot called ammonites in Sikkim, or buffalo stones, because they look like sleeping bison. They were used in spiritual ceremonies, and a man could find a buffalo stone on the prairie only if it called out to him. In the Western Isles in Scotland, ammonites are known as cramp stones and were once used to cure the cramp in cows by soaking the fossils in water and using that to wash the cow.
Wow.
Yeah. In Germany,
did it work?
Yeah, I can't comment on whether they worked or not, really. I'm going to say yes. Jeff milking his cow and was like, oh no, cramp. Jeffina, the cow, has a cramp. He has a cramp stone. Now, in Germany,
Take a bath.
Yeah, in Germany, they called ammonites dragon stones, and they put them in a milk pail to bring a cow back to milk.
Okay.
And interestingly, which is what brought me into this whole topic in the first place, was in the valley of the Gandaki River in Nepal and in northern India, ammonites are called saligrams. And if I'm pronouncing this wrong, I'm really sorry, but I haven't heard of this ever. I mean, as you know, I'm Indian. Hasn't been mentioned ever on the podcast, but I am. And these saligrams, they're considered as a symbol of Vishnu, as one of Vishnu's avatars was stone. In fact, you can see the saligram, a representation of the saligram called the chakras, which is, as you know, held in one of the 6 hands of Vishnu. So the radial chakra markings in saligrams are actually the ribs of the ammonites. I did not know that.
Oh, wow. Did not know that at all. Yeah. That is interesting.
The stones are kept in temples, households, monasteries as natural symbols of Vishnu, and water in which they have been bathed in is drunk daily. I've never heard of this, but if anyone listening has heard of it, please do leave us some information.
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know this at all. This is super surprising and interesting.
So, an ancestor of the octopus is quite close to
Still
many
around
cultures
us and
around the world.
Yeah. Okay, so moving from there to very hard. I have no segue into my section, but I'm just going to go at my last section was really grim, very grim life of the octopus. However, there was some really cute piece of information that I came across about more social octopus species.
Okay.
Right, and so there is a species of an octopus which is a mottled grayish-brown cephalopod known commonly as the Sydney octopus.
Okay.
And also sometimes it is another name for it is the gloomy octopus, which is really cute.
Oh no.
I think because it just looks gloomy, but actually it is probably one of the most social octopus species that we have come across.
Okay.
It is a community of very highly engaged and interactive octopuses. And in fact, they are octopuses who have been known to have built small cities underwater where a group of them live together.
Aww.
And there are two of these on record. One is off the coast of Australia, where a city of sorts was discovered, grouped around some rocks and built from scavenged junk and discarded prey shells. 10 to 15 of these gloomy octopuses were living together there, and the researchers, the biologists who discovered this, called this city Octopus.
Oh, like Atlantis. Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, so Octopus. And there is another city called Octopolis, which is another group of octopuses who live in close quarters, again found off the coast of Australia. Why this happens is again not entirely known, but you would imagine that just, it creating these sort of structures gives octopuses shelter and it just gives them a space to stay. But what's really surprising is that it creates shelter for a group of octopuses to live together. And forage for food as a community and sort of just live.
Oh, I love that.
So that is, so going from octopuses who absolutely hate each other to these little guys who are quite happy to live in a small city. Yeah, and so if you're ever in Australia, maybe you can catch a glimpse of Octopus and Octopus.
I love the names.
Or maybe not,
the names are just doing it for me right now.
So cute. Yeah, so I loved it. I loved the fact that, so that's social octopuses and little cities that they live in.
Oh, that's cute. I wish I could take a picture. It's a terrible, terrible segue into the first octographer. Do you know what that is?
An octopus who was a photographer?
Yes, judging by my clues. Good job, Ragini. So the world's first octographer, Rambo, is a cephalopod at the New Zealand Sea Life Aquarium who takes pictures of visitors. How cute is that?
Oh, that's so cute.
Very cute.
They are actually really cute. Like, there's some very cute stories around octopuses and...
Yeah, and I think it is. I think that their eyes look very intelligent. Like, when you look, I've watched so many octopus videos in the last couple of weeks. I think that it's their eyes. Like, you know how elephants, you can tell, like, they're so cute.
Yeah.
So coming back to Rambo, he has developed this impressive ability, obviously with a little help from human beings, and also from a certain manufacturer of cameras, which I will not name because this does seem a bit like a publicity stunt, because this particular manufacturer provided the camera and the case that would go into the tank. And then there's this little funnel with a little red button. And the octopus, just as soon as she sees it, she rushes to it, or he rushes to it, judging by the name Rambo. And then he pushes the red shutter button. And there's a video of him taking pictures of a school trip. And it is extremely good. So you must go watch it.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. Now, from Rambo, who is clearly trained to do something that is interesting, to octopuses that are part of research studies that are fed MDMA.
Wow, yeah. I've actually heard about this as well.
But it's been done. And in the human brain, MDMA, also known as ecstasy, triggers the release of neurotransmitter serotonin, causing feelings of happiness and closeness to others. The California two-spot octopus has a serotonin transport system similar to that of humans. So to determine whether the system serves the same function in octopuses as humans, Eric Edsinger at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and Jule Dolan at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, submerged 5 octopuses to basically have the time of their life in a tank. In a tank filled with MDMA-laced water. And then they observed their behavior and others of their kind. So after absorbing the drug, the animals ignored toys that would normally have intrigued them.
And hung out with each other.
Yeah, and then they socialized, spent more time together, and touched each other with their arms more than they usually would.
That's exactly. Wow, they really were having a little rave around there.
So they got really up close and personal. And basically, the findings suggest that serotonin played an important part in social behavior in the common ancestor of octopuses and vertebrates. But as you remember, those branches split more than 500 million years ago.
Yes, they did. Wow, but it still means that we have something in common. We all love MDMA clearly, and we all fall in love on MDMA. Okay, so I read about this really interesting phenomena based on it's called tentacle erotica.
I've heard of this,
and it is a type of pornography that is most commonly found in Japan, and it is basically it depicts tentacle creatures having sex with predominantly female characters. The most famous early instance of creatures with tentacles appearing in Japanese erotica is from an illustration in 1814 by Hokusai Katsushika in what is popularly called the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. It is an example of a shunga, which is a Japanese erotic woodblock art. And it has over the years been reworked by multiple artists, including an artist, Masami Teraoka, who brought the image up to date in a work in 2001 called Sarah and the Octopus / Seventh Heaven. The story basically is around, it dates back to the Edo period, which is basically a period from the 1600 to 1868 in Japanese culture. Mm-hmm. And it is a story of the princess Tamatori, who was very popular in that time. In this story, Tamatori, who is a shell diver, which was a common profession back then, is searching for a pearl stolen from her husband's family by the dragon god of the sea. And vowing to help her husband, she dives down to his underwater palace and is then pursued by the god and his army of sea creatures, who include octopuses. In an attempt to get away, she cuts open her own breast, places the jewel inside so that it would allow her to swim faster and escape. But she does die from the wound soon after reaching the surface. Now, that's the folklore and the story behind it.
Okay.
However, over the years, as people have sort of seen this design that has now become really, really famous, which is the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, in Japanese culture, most Japanese audiences who would view this would view it as being consensual. So basically, it's an image of a woman being pleasured by two octopuses. And, in Japanese culture, they would view it as being consensual. They recognize the cultural references around it. They understand the legend that it depicts. However, in most Western audiences, when they react to it, the reactions aren't as positive. So a lot to do with just cultural sensibilities, I guess.
I mean, it is so far so different from what other cultures are, what is in other cultures, that it would be...
Yeah, what's prevalent?
It would be, novelty.
In terms of what we see.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, and there are multiple pieces of work from this period that have depicted erotic relations between women and octopuses. However, now, as time has passed, tentacle erotica has become a really prominent motif in the adult film industry, particularly.
Oh.
So, and this image is often cited as a forerunner for what is tentacle erotica as we know it today.
Can't say I've ever seen any, but that's interesting.
It's a big thing in manga. It's become really popular in the late 20th century through modern Japanese animation and manga, since popularized by author Toshio Maeda. And usually in these, as it has evolved, it's sort of stopped being as consensual as it was previously depicted as, and has become slightly more forceful in its representations. There are theories around this, particularly by a psychologist and critic, Jerry S. Piven, who is skeptical that Hokusai's playful image, as originally intended, could account for the more violent depictions in modern media. What he argues is that these are the more contemporary depictions, as we see them today, are products of the turmoil experienced throughout Japanese society following World War II. And it is indicative of the underlying currents of cultural trauma that they went through as a society, which could actually be quite feasible and true. And there is another study that says that only for a society that already has a predilection for monsters and is used to interacting with octopods, such images might arise, which basically means that, in ancient culture, there was possibly a likelihood that the Japanese were familiar with octopuses and would have close interactions with them, not necessarily as pets or whatever, but definitely just something that they were used to seeing around. And yeah, so basically tentacle erotica is now a form of pornography, quite prevalent across the world.
Is it?
It apparently is.
Hey, whatever floats your boat.
And because contemporary censorship in Japan dates back only to after the influence of the European Victorian culture, which became a catalyst for, legislative interest in public sexual mores and acts. A lot of the anti-censorship laws in Japan are actually come from more European sensibilities that the Allies imposed upon them after the Second World War. And so, therefore, what you see is the diversity of permissible sexual acts is really wide in Japan compared to other liberal democracies, even now. And tentacle erotica as a genre is now well known enough in Japan right now to become the subject of parody. And in the 21st century, Japanese films of this genre have become more common in the United States and Europe, although it still remains small and a fetish-oriented part of the adult film industry. And a lot of tentacle erotica is animated. However, there are some live-action movies which would be really, really strange, I guess.
I suppose if you could do Transformers, why not tentacle erotica?
That's a good point. So from MDMA, porn, what else is left to cover in this very adult episode?
So thanks for coming along with us on this journey from the Mesozoic, Jurassic eras all the way to present-day tentacle porn. It's been interesting, to say the least. And we'll see you next time.
Bye. Okay, that's it for today. The episode you just heard was edited by Mohit Chandelier. Music for the episode is by Charitha Arora. If you'd like to reach out to us about the podcast, the episode, or you just want to say hi in general, we're on Instagram as Barely Research Facts. You could also come to the website at www.ArtNowThus.in. If you like the podcast, review, subscribe, and please share it with other podcast lovers in your circle. It would mean so much to us. Until next time, bye.